Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and in discussing the Dominion War over the years, there's a topic that constantly reappears time after time, and that being the topic of attack ships. Whether it's the Klingon Bird of Prey, the Jem'hadar attack ship, or the Defiant, the attack ship as a vessel is arguably iconic and very heavily intertwined with that of the Dominion War, and over the years I've definitely looked at my fair share of them. That being said, there's one attack ship which I have somewhat overlooked, arguably deliberately, that being the Romulan Scoutship. Now, technically I have looked at it, largely in comparing it to the other attack ships of the Dominion War, in which it does not fare particularly well. Really what I want to look at today is, well, why does the Romulan Scoutship fare so badly in a comparison with other attack ships? And is it really actually a fair comparison? So let's get right into it. So let's first look at the context of the Romulan Scoutship. Now, while I would like to say that the Romulan Scoutship is produced well before the other attack ships, and thus it's not a fair comparison, is not actually true. Because, of course, the Klingon Bird of Prey was built as early as the 2270s. Meanwhile, we have no clue how old the Jem'hadar fighter is, but it's likely a very old design that they've been using for a very, very long time. And so the only real outliers in this category are the Defiant and the Cardassian Hideki, which are both built in the 2370s. So I can't honestly say that it's simply because the Romulan Scoutship is old and that's why it's bad. That isn't exactly sufficient reason. So we need to look further into the context. The Romulan Scoutship was probably built around about the 2250s. It's very likely that it was built about the same time as the Dideridex, and would serve as the primary successor to the Raven class, which I have previously covered, which was a lot larger and was used as the Romulans' main spy and reconnaissance vessel. In so doing, the Scoutship inherits the mission of recon, but it also takes on a mission of internal policing, bearing in mind that a lot of pre-warbirds are now going out of service because they're very expensive to run. Now, for full context, as far as I'm concerned, Romulan Scoutships are antimatter powered. There's no way you'd fit a quantum singularity in that thing, and critically, it's going to be a lot more efficient in using that antimatter drive than a big lumbering old Nova. So, in regards to the comparison to attack ships, many of you will probably remember that I did a collab with Drakinifel, and we very quickly cottoned on to the fact that attack ships are basically the stand-in for torpedo boats of the late 19th century, early 20th century. That being said, I don't think that the Romulan Scoutship is a torpedo boat. I think it is far closer in relation to a coastal patrol vessel or other similar craft, has more in common with something like the Oberth or the Oberth derivatives than it does the heavily armed attack ships, torpedo boats of the latter period. The other thing we have to bear in mind with the Romulan Scout is that it is born into a world of warbirds. Warbirds, which are invisible and omnipresent tools of power projection, at least theoretically. Obviously, warbirds' invisibility is not perfect, nor are they actually omnipresent. However, the whole idea of a warbird is because they have infinite range and they have a good cloaking device, you never know how many warbirds are nearby. And in terms of power projection and protecting your borders from other enemy powers, that's actually a very good way of doing it, because your enemy is in a perpetual state of uncertainty. They never know if there's one Romulan warbird nearby or 5, and that creates a high degree of uncertainty and helps protect your territory due to the sheer uncertainty of what they're actually going to be facing. However, the reality is of course that warbirds can't be in two places at once, and while the warbirds are busy guarding your frontiers, they're not doing internal policing and patrolling. And the other thing to bear in mind is that even if you could, not everything is going to warrant the presence of a warbird, and you're never going to be able to build enough warbirds to be everywhere at once. So, this is really where the impetus for a smaller Romulan vessel comes from. Now, you might ask, well, why don't you build a frigate? Something like the Melak class, or the Armada Raptor, which is much smaller than the Legacy Raptor. Why don't you build one of those? And the reality is that you're ending up with a lot of the same requirements and constraints that you would have with a warbird. That being, it has to have a relatively large crew complement, so it's relatively manpower intensive. And again, it can only be in one place at a time. It also eats into your shipbuilding infrastructure. Because it's a relatively large-ish ship, it means that you're going to have to free up dock space to build those when you could be freeing up dock space to build warbirds. So there's a conflict and tension between warbirds and smaller frigate-like vessels that could perhaps do that. And you're never going to be able to build enough of them to be everywhere at once. However, something the size of a scout can be built quickly, in high numbers, can be easily modified, and can potentially be carried by warbirds. Now, this is a very controversial point. You see, if you actually take a Romulan Scoutship and line it up against the big shuttle bays of the Diduridex, it just barely doesn't fit, unfortunately. Now, here's the thing, and this comes back to Alpha Cannon, Beta Cannon, designer intention, and everything. Andrew Probert designed the Diduridex, and he also designed it in a specific way, with provision for bad guy stuff. I.e., he wanted the Diduridex to have the ability to do all sorts of things as the various plots would require, as the script writers would require. The Diduridex can do it because it's big enough, it's got the capacity. There's that very famous concept art of the filled out bottom of the Diduridex where the lower wings are not concave, they're fully filled in, and you have a gigantic shuttle bay in there. And certainly you can tell that was Probert's intention, that was what he wanted. However, it didn't necessarily make it onto the final model. But the reason I talk so much about Probert is because it's worth mentioning that the Scoutship was designed by Rick Sternbach, who is a different designer, who is not necessarily thinking on the same lines. Although, interestingly, Sternbach definitely has his own aesthetic and his own interests. So with Sternbach particularly, modularity really comes out. He builds almost all of his ships for modularity, which is very interesting. But in any case, the point is that when Sternbach was designing that Scoutship, he wouldn't have been designing it to fit in the Diduridex, because that's someone else's design. This is the job he's got to do. This is the ship he's got to design. However, if we think about this from the logic of in-universe, there is no way that a project going on concurrently with the Diduridex, with a ship that is basically the right size to fit inside the Diduridex's shuttle bays, there's no way that you'd actually end up with a situation where the Scoutship would just barely not fit in the Diduridex. Either they'd make it fit, or it really, really, really wouldn't fit. It would be one or the other, but it's so tantalizingly close. Maybe it was a colossal oversight by Imperial procurement, and that could be a whole story in and of itself, that the shuttle bay doors were just slightly too small, or the Scoutship came out just that little bit too big. That's also quite a good story, but equally, you would also still have the capacity of docking the Scoutship inside the wings of the Diduridex, and that is certainly something that doesn't require really much alteration or any alter to the design of the Diduridex. It's more than capable of doing that in the form that we see on screen. Anyway, enough talking about the Diduridex. I've said Diduridex way too many times, don't take any shots for that. So the whole idea of this modular scouting platform is actually very similar to the Federation Condor. You could probably argue that the Romulan Scoutship is more akin to the Federation Condor class than it is the attack ships of the Dominion War. That might be a better, more flattering comparison. In terms of the modularity, well, we have two variants that we know of for sure. We have two head types. We have a sort of sleek pointed head and a more sort of greeble textured head that looks like it's got a load of sensors on it. We then have a blank tail or a semicircular tail. Maybe that's another sensor. And also in other depictions, there's a dorsal weapons pod, although it's not featured on the variant that we see in the Defector. But that is commonly featured in, I believe, comic books. I've certainly seen it in the Operation Assimilate comic book, which we will be coming back to. Now, other features to point out is you have a lot of these grills in the wings. I've always thought that there are small hidden weapons behind the grills. In fact, maybe they actually are just carrying fusion missiles, nuclear weapons. Given the job that the scout ship is intended to do, you wouldn't necessarily need the most modern weapons to do it. And that aside, there's almost certainly even more variants that we just haven't seen. And it is really quite a shame that Rick Sternbach didn't take the liberty of designing more modules as he did for the Vocha. Because you could have an electronic warfare variant, an AWACS variant, an anti-cloak variant, a minesweeper, a mine layer, cargo variants, spy ships, patrol ships. The possibilities are frankly endless. And, in terms of doing it for a studio model, the base studio model is actually very simple. It's just that main central wing body, and then there are clear attachment points all over the place. You can, again, swap out the head, you can add dorsal or ventral modules, and you can add modules onto the aft section as well. The possibilities are endless, and it would better honour Probert's intentions from when he designed the Doduridex. As I mentioned before, that idea of include the capacity for bad guy stuff. You don't worry what it is, you just include the capacity for it, the writers will come up with it, and you'll then slap it on there. And so that's something that I think would definitely make sense for the Romulan Scoutship, because it is clearly a modular design like that. Now, as I previously mentioned, there is a comic book, I believe it's called Operation Assimilate. The opening of this comic book is very telling because it opens with this Romulan captain of a small scout ship who's really not happy with her situation. She's wishing she was in command of a Doduridex penetrating deep into the Federation, and instead she's on this pathetic little scout ship going around putting down slave rebellions. But that is an essential task in the Romulan Empire. Remember, the Romulan Empire is an empire and has conquered and enslaved many species over its lifetime. And, well, they're not going to keep themselves in line. Every so often you're going to need a ship to come along and knock them back into shape, so to speak. And frankly, to use a Doduridex for that is wasteful. Now, the Doduridex absolutely has a role in that. You show up with the Doduridex the first time, and the people that you're conquering go, oh my word, that's horrifying and utterly awe-inspiring and incredible. But you don't waste a Doduridex on this population. The Doduridex has done its job now. It's subdued the population psychologically. It can move on. You can send it away to do other more important tasks. And then if the population does rise up, frankly, in the 24th century, the firepower brought by a single scout ship on a planet that is, bear in mind, enslaved, so the Romulans have control of all of the various defensive installations, or the Romulans have just destroyed any means of the planet defending itself, and so a single scout ship like that is more than sufficient to subdue a populace on their empire. So the Doduridex scares people into order, but it is the scout ship which holds them there, which holds them under the Empire's iron fist. I think out of all the various attack ships that we see in the Dominion War, perhaps the best and fairest comparison is with the Cardassian Hideki, which similarly started out life as a patrol ship, although potentially the Cardassians had much more belligerent intentions for the Hideki than the Romulans ever had for their scout ship. Remember, the Romulans didn't see the advent of the attack ship coming, really. Nonetheless, it was dragooned into a war that it was not prepared for, and this simply reminds me of a quote that is fondly quoted by military historians and analysts, and that is, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you'd like. And while for some of the other allies, that is not necessarily the case, for the Romulans in the Dominion War, it most certainly was. So thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video. Thank you to my members for supporting the channel. It is only with their support that I can continue to bring you this content that you will enjoy. My Navarks, Jeffrey Ballard, Tully DT, Rella, and Macross Schaffer. My commanders, Philip Ty, Bird Monster, Jeff Hallam, Mark Philippe, Robert Sampson, Sean Farrell, Narata, Nathaniel Mead, Gabe Logan, DM Tribal Typhoon, Nicholas Walsh, Martin McConville, JC Tech Wizard, Rizel 3D, James C, Alcara Dreamer, Joe G, Turd Ferguson, You Don't Know Trek, and Scotty O. And I salute my Centurions, Pendlebury, Marcus Hall, Julian Arnott, Freedom Trooper, Okokatum Questo, Squadra Course, John Nicole, Athes Collection, Tobias Klein, Greg Martin, Mazarine, and Bird of Play D3. And I thank all my loyal sub-lieutenants. Thank you guys for supporting the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.